And yes, indeed, you can buy physical Bitcoins. The physical Bitcoins actually have a tamper-evident, supposedly hologram seal on the back with the private key underneath. My bet is you could probably make pretty good money buying these, opening up the tamper-resistant seal, taking the money out of it, sealing it back up, and selling it to reporters. This is just a thought exercise, mind you. I'm not advocating fleecing the Fourth Estate, even if they deserve it. And in general, the best predictor of Bitcoin price is how much press Bitcoin is getting at the time.
Have you done the correlation?
No, but other people have.
Should we be mining our own Bitcoins?
No. Bitcoin mining is a Red Queen's race. I will get to that later. In fact, it's to the point where even if you have a botnet, it's not really that profitable to mine Bitcoins.
Should we go ahead and go? All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nick Weaver. Students that have been in my class, we've read at least one or two of his papers. So you may know him from How to Own the Internet in Your Spare Time, is a famous paper he did looking at worm propagation strategies. More recently, he's been involved in the Nettalizer work, looking at various issues of not only residential broadband, but all the wacky, horrible ways in which computers get screwed up, get their communication screwed up, including papers that we've looked at that looked at how they providers are monetizing DNS by trying to do man in the middle type of thing.
They gave up on that.
Nick is from UC Berkeley /ICSI, and we've collaborated on a few things, and he's going to talk to us about Bitcoin today. So.
Before I start about Bitcoin, though, one thing on network measurement that I want a meme adopted by people, Paxson's Law. The network is weirder than you expect, even when you include Paxson's Law. So I'm going to talk about Bitcoin. So, a disclaimer, this is a fun talk. It's not talking about my research. Our group does focus a lot on malicious behaviors and monetization, and bad guys have been mining with Bitcoin, so if bots use it as a source of revenue, we're interested. But this talk is not about my research. It's just instead about this wild, weird, and wacky world that's grown up around Bitcoin. And as a result, I'm a huge Bitcoin doubter. About a month or so ago, I was answering a reporter's questions on Bitcoin, and she said that I was the only one who seemed like a doubter that she talked to, and I just was going, she was talking to the wrong people, because as you'll see later, if you talk to economists, they think Bitcoin is crazy. And the research in general is NSF and Naval Research Lab and some other stuff from DHS, but all opinions are my own, not those of the founder or of my colleagues, that I am probably the biggest Bitcoin doubter in the group. So to begin with, what is Bitcoin? Well, technically, it's a pseudonymous distributed public transaction ledger. So what do I mean by that? Turn on the rear projector. It makes it easier for me to know where I am.
Yes, sir.
I already turned it on. That's what I was doing. So what I mean is pseudonymous. It's not anonymous. Everything has a unique identifier, but it's a pseudonym. It's distributed. There's no single point of trust. And it's public transaction ledger. So it's basically a public account balance of everything. And it's armored with a SHA-256 proof of work. The NSA would need to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to change the proof of work, and even if you could, you don't gain all that much from it. So technically, it's very sound. But it's also a shared delusion of value. Don't worry about it. I can just use this.
I'll play with it for a second.
So There's no actual value, but there's people who believe it has value, therefore it does have value. As Terry Pratchett put it in the book, Making Money, it is the dream of gold. Perfect. So let's start with a bit of the good to actually review what Bitcoin is. A Bitcoin wallet is not a wallet, but just a public-private key pair. And they're using elliptic curve digital signature on curve SecP256K1, which is completely meaningless to me and any non-cryptographer, but the cryptographers generally would trust it for signatures. And that public key that you see everywhere, the one blah blah blahs, or three blah blah blahs, is just base 58 encoded. It's a modified base 64 with some characters removed, namely things like capital I and the like, of the ripe MD160 hash of the SHA-256 hash of the public key. One of the things that Bitcoin is weird from a technical standpoint is there's a lot of double hashing. And so there's a lot of hashes of SHA hashes, and in this case it's a ripe MD160 hash of a SHA hash. Why this is, I don't know. Ask the anonymous inventor, Satoshi Nakamura. But so if somebody wants to send a value to me, in this case 0.02041321 Bitcoin, Bitcoin is fixed point denominated with this much precision. And in fact, 0.00000001 Bitcoins is known as a Satoshi. And they want to send it to this Bitcoin address, which I control. Yes, that is a valid Bitcoin address. Yes, it does accept Bitcoins. Yes, it is my Bitcoin address.
Did you have to work to get that?
Yes. There is a vanity gen tool that brute force tries to create Bitcoin wallets and then sees if the public key matches a pattern. That was about 2 days runtime on a 16-core system. But I am quite proud of that. But so if somebody wants to send that much Bitcoin to me, and I encourage people to do so, all they do is publish a signed message saying, transfer this much Bitcoin to me, and also transfer a transaction fee of 0.0005 Bitcoin to the miner. I'll get to in a second how that works. But all they do is they publish a message, and now, if everyone has a copy of this global ledger, it's trivial to verify the transaction. And that means I'm up, and the miner is up, and the sender is down, and everything balances. It's a provably zero-sum transaction, and as long as they had a positive balance, it's a valid transaction. If they had a negative valid transaction, the transaction's never accepted. And so the insanely clever idea behind Bitcoin is, how do you protect a public ledger? How do you make it so the ledger is writ in stone, not sand? And this is the Bitcoin innovation. And the whole point behind proof of work and mining. Mining is not about creating Bitcoins. Mining is about putting an indelible stamp on history. So the key behind Bitcoin is this public notion of the blockchain, is this chain of history. So each block contains a pointer to the previous block, that's a hash of the block, a hash of all transactions in this block, the time, the current difficulty, which I'll get to in a second, and a nonce. And all transactions in this block, this Merkle root, the first transaction is special. It says, pay the miner's public key a fixed quantity, currently it's 25 Bitcoin, plus all the transaction fees. And so all the transactions are hashed in a Merkle tree, and they use it as a Merkle tree, so during this process, you can add new entries easily. And the key thing is the hash of this header. So the hash of everything is less than a function of this difficulty parameter, and this difficulty parameter is globally creatable. So it's a globally assigned parameter. And so how does this make this whole Bitcoin mining and proof of work thing work? Well, what the miner does is has the previous block that's committed, has all these unconfirmed transactions that are just publicly broadcast throughout the world, creates the block header, creates the Merkle tree of all the transactions, and then attempts to find a partial hash collision by changing that nonce value. And if that nonce value runs out and it's only a 32-bit nonce, you change the source address of the first transaction. This is what's known as the Coinbase address, and it's basically a message. It can be Kilroy was here, it can be something random, but you just increment it. And if a partial collision is found such that that hash value is less than that difficulty function, you publish it. And congratulations, you got 25 Bitcoin. If not, if somebody else publishes something matching first, well, now you remove all the confirmed transactions because they're now confirmed, and you repeat this process all over again. And that's it. That is all Bitcoin mining is. And then this whole mining pool stuff is a way of splitting the work out so that you don't need to keep track of everything and evens out the odds. But that's all Bitcoin mining is. And the block reward and difficulty are both automatically tuned. Every 1,000 blocks, the difficulty is automatically adjusted by public consensus such that blocks are created every 10 minutes. So this is a tuning parameter that's purely public consensus. Anybody can determine how to calculate it. And if you say the difficulty is something other than what everybody else believes it is, you are rejected. And then the block reward is all the transaction fees plus was initially 50 Bitcoins. Now it's 25. It drops down to 12.5, 6.25, depending on the block number. And this is baked into the protocol. So because the protocol operates by consensus, you'd need to change consensus to change this. And so currently the reward is 25 Bitcoins, so that means 3,600 Bitcoins are produced per day. It will have again in about 3 years. So what are the implications of this? Well, the proof of work acts to armor the blockchain. It makes history written in stone. To change history, you need to perform as much work as is captured in that blockchain, or break SHA-256. If you can break SHA-256, you have much more profitable things to do than mucking around with Bitcoin. So,
is that part of the reason they do both SHA and MD?
No,
there's not a weakness in one?
No, everything in Bitcoin except for that address calculation is all SHA. The SHA and MD is mostly for representation. The SHA-256 is bigger than it needs to be. That the MD 160 is enough. And so rather than doing SHA and dropping X bits, they just use MD. But needless to say, if SHA is secure, this thing is really rock solid. And so basically in practice, after confirmation, Bitcoin is effectively irreversible. There are attacks if you control half the hash power of the entire network, which right now is 100 trillion SHA-256 hashes a second. It's a pretty good amount of compute there. But the longer you wait, the greater the armor. So if you wait, there was a case a few months back where due to a bug, history split and they wanted to basically commit to one form of history, and it took the entire Bitcoin network on the order of several hours to straighten out history. So if you wait a day or two, it truly is indelible. The blockchain is a great way of storing information that you can say was created at this point in time, and nobody can change.
When you said difficulty is determined by consensus, how does that happen?
There's just an algorithm that says, how long did it take for the last 1,024 blocks to get created? Because each block has a timestamp, and you have to be within a little bit. And you see what that is, that you use that to estimate the network hash rate, and you use that to calculate the difficulty function so that going forward, you create one block every 10 minutes. But this also means that Bitcoin mining is effectively a Red Queen's race. If other people run faster, you've got to run faster just to stay where you are. We'll get to the implications of this later, but it's quite interesting. And also, the monetary policy is baked into the Bitcoin protocol algorithmically. There will only be 21 million Bitcoin created. Period. Full stop. If this changes, it's no longer Bitcoin. It's something else. But the good ends there. The Bitcoin protocol is very sound. If you have author ID tools you want to find out who Satoshi Nakamoto is and hire him ASAP. Because whoever designed this protocol knew what they were doing, and the blockchain proof of work is a really clever idea. But there's no polite way to put it. The Bitcoin community is insane. It's just crazy, 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 crazy. And so the rest of this talk will be through the crazy, 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 crazy world of uniting futuristic left-wing internet anarchism with cave-dwelling right-wing libertarian gold bugs. This is an amazingly succinct summary of the Bitcoin community. So, Bitcoin doesn't suffer from insanity. It encourages it, it enjoys it, it embraces the insanity. Also the criminality, too. Stefan Savage has a quip, don't trust anybody in the Bitcoin community who doesn't have a felony conviction already. So let's start with the economic issues. So I'll talk about the implications of that Red Queen's race mining, the least minor thing wrong with Bitcoin. I will talk about the joys of a hyperdeflationary currency. That hyperdeflationary is a term coined by Felix Salmon. He's an economics correspondent to describe it. Net influx of new belief, which is my hypothesis for what sets the market price of Bitcoin. And how Bitcoin is fundamentally incompatible with modern finance and can never be fixed. Just period incompatible. Which also means that Bitcoin is actually useless for actually buying stuff. So social issues, what can you buy? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You can gamble with it, and you can go on Silk Road, and the Silk Road marketplace is basically drugs, 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 books about drugs, 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 drugs. Makes it pretty easy for your civil forfeiture case. I will talk about the delusion of anonymity in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is most decidedly not anonymous. I will tell the story of Bitcoin Savings and Trust, which is quite an amusing little incident. I will mention the Mt. Gox versus CoinLab. Mt. Gox is the biggest Bitcoin exchange, so Bitcoins are a currency. You need to be able to exchange it. Mt. Gox just happens to be the biggest currency exchange that runs an open market. And when I mean big, I mean a couple $100,000 a day volume. I don't know about you, but penny stocks are bigger than this. And trivia, Mt. Gox originally stood for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. Yes, a place to trade collector's cards. And finally, the Winklevoss twins are into Bitcoin. If something the Winklevoss twins are into, run away. So, the net number of Bitcoins produced per day remains constant no matter the power of the miners. So basically, as more miners are added, more powerful miners are added, the old ones just lose out. This is fundamental to how Bitcoin operates. You can't make more Bitcoin by getting better miners. You can only get a bigger share of the Bitcoins created. Which means, as a result, if you're serious about mining Bitcoin, you have to run faster and faster just to stay in place. And right now, it's dominated by custom ASICs. Yes, people have been built custom silicon that all it does is SHA-256 calculations as fast as possible in order to mine Bitcoin. And currently, it's 200 trillion SHA-256 hashes a second. This is an insane amount of computing power doing SHA-hash. The good news of this lovely little Red Queen's race, well, not good news for us as researchers because we get paid to study botnets, but it is killing off the botnets because, well, the botnets, those computers aren't getting any better. The hash functions are getting better. Therefore, your revenue per bot is going down. The bad news is the revenue is going to those selling shovels. So, like, currently, the higher-end Bitcoin ASICs do pencil. If I could get a Butterfly Labs ASIC or an Avalon ASIC today, I could actually net make money on it. But a lot of those, actually, you can't. So, like, ASIC Miner, which is a company that actually built ASIC miners and then just put them all in the machine and mined for themselves, and has been selling second-tier ASICs on USB. The current break-even, if you buy one of those, is 200 days. So you have to buy it, and it breaks even in 200 days. If 100 days from now the hash rate doubles again, well, your break-even is now 200 days from that day. In fact, when they first released these a month ago, you could pay 1.6 Bitcoins and get it immediately, and then now they've dropped the price to 1 Bitcoin, which meant if you paid to get it early, you actually lost money because it would be more sensible to wait and then buy it. And this hash rate has been growing exponentially over the past year, actually just since about February. So this is the past year hash function, just got off Bitcoin, one of the Bitcoin chart sites, and you can't really see it, but this is a year ago. This is February. This is when the ASIC started shipping, and you went from a hash rate on the order of 20 to 40 terahash to 200 terahash. So we are on this exponential growth of Bitcoin mining, about doubling every month. So about every month and a half, the amount of hash power is doubling, and it's been this way since February.
Odd question for you, sir, but what happens if there was some anomaly and you just stop mining Bitcoin, there's some disruption, and there's the computer process applied to Bitcoin mining went way down, so the difficulty function would actually decrease the
Yes.
Would that cause any problem in the algorithm? Because it seemed like the difficulty always had to get better.
No, it's actually, it will take a while to reset. So if, say, 80% of the mining dropped off, it'll take a long time to produce those 1,000 blocks needed. But once that 1,024th block is done, the difficulty recalculates and is now very much lower. So, in fact, there have been cases, you can't really see it because of the log scale, but back between December and January, you actually had a dip in the hash function and you had a dip in the difficulty level as well. You can't really see it on this graph. You'd actually have to go onto the web page itself. But that's actually designed to happen in Bitcoin. Difficulty can go down. But needless to say, you don't want to waste time mining Bitcoin. This is to quote the philosopher Whopper, the only move is not to play. The other thing is, and this is, as I said, a term from Felix Salmon, is Bitcoin is hyper-deflationary. The Bitcoins are at this fixed rate, 3,600 per day. with this eventual limit, and it's possible to lose and destroy bitcoins. Bitcoins to a wallet which is either invalid or where the private key is lost are lost forever. Which means Bitcoin has a monetary father, somebody who truly expounds Bitcoin's monetary policy. This guy. Yes, it is the ultimate Glenn Beck gold bug monetary policy. Needless to say, it ignores the lesson that nobody has ever done this in practice because it's a stupid idea. Because if Bitcoin has a future value, why spend it today? Because there's a fixed supply and always this eventual increase in demand, the only rational thing to do if you believe in Bitcoin is never spend a Bitcoin. There is no rational reason to spend a Bitcoin now because it is going to be more valuable in the future. In fact, Bitcoin is so small that if the libertarian voters all wanted a few $100 worth of Bitcoin, you'd blow the market out.
Wait, so is it rational because of some of the things you can buy with it?
Let us assume that you could buy stuff with Bitcoin. Even if you assume that, it is not actually rational to spend your Bitcoins if you believe in Bitcoin. If you don't believe in Bitcoin, it's not rational to touch the stuff at all. But if you do believe in it, it is not rational to use it. This is a very interesting thing because it means it actually can't work as a currency. Because a currency is supposed to be able to circulate. And in general, currency inflation is bad. Hyperinflation is really bad. Deflation kills countries. And there's a reason why, as a result, nobody has ever had a long-term monetary policy where it truly was a fixed gold standard. The gold always got diluted and the coinage goes up and down in quality, and eventually you end up with coins that are gold-ish rather than gold. Because this is such a rigid structure, it can't work. So how could you actually build a currency that doesn't actually make sense to use as a currency? Well, fortunately for Bitcoin, Bitcoin believers are not rational. Because if they were rational, the system would have frozen already. Instead, what defines the price of Bitcoin? Which you see the Twitter feeds, you see the reports on NPR. This is my personal hypothesis. I am a believer in what can only be described as the efficiently inefficient market hypothesis. I came to this conclusion around 1998, watching the dot-com stocks bubble up, reinforced watching the real estate bubble up, and I personally believe that the market reflects the price as determined by the knowledge and belief of the active market participants. And so what does this have to do with Bitcoin? Well, a resold Bitcoin is a zero-sum operation. X dollars in, X dollars out. If I've got a Bitcoin that's been circulating for a while, and I sell it to Rob for $1,350, that has not added any new money into Bitcoin, because Rob put in, but I took out. The only new influx of belief into Bitcoin is the newly mined coins. So somewhere between $0 to $3,600 Bitcoins per day must be matched by new belief measured in dollars. Now, some of the Bitcoins are hoarded, but some are sold on the open market. And so for the ones sold on the open market, there must be that much dollars coming in to match the mining in a steady state. And so that's about $360,000 a day. Before this major run-up recently, back when Bitcoin was 10 and people were growing Bitcoins high, that was $36,000 a day. By modern finance standards, Bitcoin is nothing. Bitcoin is so incredibly small as to be irrelevant. The Icelandic krona is a far more significant currency. This also means that Bitcoin is very, very, very sensitive to changes in new belief. If 10 new people each believe in Bitcoin $10,000 added that day, that's 20, 30% of the entire net new belief coming in, which means Bitcoin is very sensitive to the press. If there's a lot of press about Bitcoin, more people try to buy Bitcoins, price goes up. There's a little bit of Bitcoin being forgotten. So after the big run up to 200, the press kind of sort of forgot about Bitcoin. It kind of slid back down to 100 and back down to 80. And it's bouncing around 80 to 100 for a while. And so the net takeaway is Bitcoin is tiny and Bitcoin's very sensitive to psychology. Don't try to predict the price of Bitcoin. It will get you a headache. But this is all a sideshow for the biggest problem, and that's irreversibility. Irreversibility is a fundamental tenet of Bitcoin. All transactions are irreversible because they don't trust central authorities. Reversibility needs an authority to be able to undo something. But a fundamental tenet of modern finance is anything large and electronic must be reversible, at least for the next day. This is baked into the heart and soul of our financial system, and it's the only reason it works. Because of fraud. An irreversible transaction, you can only depend on fraud protection. That these little physical pieces in my wallet, I can only prevent somebody from taking this away from me. If they've taken it away from me in fraud, and it's gone for good. Reversible transactions allow fraud mitigation, and fraud mitigation makes your fraud problem so much easier. It's so much easier in case of, hey Rob, buy me a Coke. I hand him $5. He doesn't chug me a Coke. Somebody else can take the money back and hand it back to me. Reversibility is a key tenet of modern finance, especially anything large and electronic. And this is what will kill Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin people have yet to acknowledge this.
You can just build escrow on top of this and then have what you want?
This means banks. That is called a bank. These are people who think that fractional reserve banking is a fraud. So this means outside somebody willing to act as an escrow service, the dollar to Bitcoin path is very hard. You can never purchase Bitcoin with a simple wire transfer. The recipient must hold on to your money for a while before giving you Bitcoins. There is never going to be instant gratification electronically with Bitcoin. This is basically an escrow service, which means it will always take a few days to buy Bitcoin, even in a perfect world. And in fact, there is a company right now, Coinbase, where you can, if you can actually get an account, buy Bitcoins with transfers from your bank account. You have to wait 4 business days and can only do $100 a day because that's the only way they can deal with fraud, is by making the amount so small and the latency so high that attackers can't use it for fraud. Because otherwise the exchange is a fraud magnet, because I, as somebody evil, would just compromise my target's checking account. This is easy. People can't secure their computers. Transfer that money to a Bitcoin exchange and take the Bitcoins and run. Exchanges must wait. And in fact, this already killed a Bitcoin exchange actually about 1.5 years ago. Actually 2 years ago now. So TradeHill, this name has been resurrected, but the first go-around was a Bitcoin exchange based in the US, and they accepted money transfers using this company called Dwolla. Now, how many people have heard of Dwolla? Better than I expected, actually. Dwolla is, all it is a PayPal ripoff, with one exception. They have a very hostile policy towards chargebacks. PayPal is merchant unfriendly. They will issue chargebacks at the drop of a pin. They're just chargeback happy, which is great for consumers, horrid for merchants. So Dwolla's thing was bank account only, so they don't have the credit card chargebacks, and then no chargebacks allowed policy. And this was designed to be merchant friendly. And However, back in 2011, Dwala was getting hit by fraud. And, well, bank account transfers, despite what Dwala wanted, do have chargebacks. So Dwala is getting chargebacks. So they changed their chargeback policy to basically add chargebacks in case of fraud. And so what happened to TradeHill? $90,000 was clawed back from TradeHill for fraudulent transactions that went through, turned into bitcoins, and disappeared into the ether. And $70K frozen against future chargebacks, because one of the things the credit card companies have learned, if somebody gets a lot of chargebacks, don't give them the money right away. Needless to say, TradeHill goes bankrupt. Tries to sue for $2 million in damages. Pretty small by Bitcoin lawsuit standards, as we'll see. Unfortunately for them, there was this lovely little binding arbitration clause in their contract, and they got laughed out of court. The end. So how can you buy Bitcoins? Well, you can do a swift money transfer to an exchange like Mt. Gox, which then sits on it for a while, even assuming you can get the transfer to work and have it not stuck in limbo. I've got a colleague who's trying to buy a couple $1,000s worth of Bitcoins, and the wire transfer is stuck in the ether somewhere. You can buy it face-to-face. There's some nice little companies that are setups where you can basically find somebody local, meet in the park, give them the cash, they give you the Bitcoin, wait around for 10 minutes. You know what I said about Bitcoin, once it's confirmed, is indelible? Until it's confirmed, it is trivial to double spend. So don't buy Bitcoin from me in the park unless you're willing to wait around 10 minutes, because otherwise I'm going to take that, show the screen on my phone that says I transferred the Bitcoin to you, press a button that floods it with a different transaction that pays to a different wallet to me, and walk away. Do not wait, or do not buy Bitcoins and not stick around. Or this is actually the best method right now, is a cash drop at CVS Pharmacy. I kid you not. Because if you can actually get an account at BitInstant, they're having some growing pains right now, they accept cash drops through ZipZap, which partners with Western Union. So you take your $1,000 to CVS, you try to find somebody who wants to sell you a ZipZap voucher there and actually get them to do that. That basically Western Union's the money to ZipZap, and you get a $1,000 minus 5% voucher. So you got $950 as a ZipZap voucher, which you can then take to BitInstant online and get about $920 worth of Bitcoin. This seems like an expensive, awkward, and annoying way, but this is actually the best way to get Bitcoin right now. And because of that irreversible, you have to go through this irreversible gate. Anything big on Bitcoin, you have to have cash drops. You either have to have cash drops or wait days. There's no other way of doing it. So this means Bitcoin will always be too high friction for usability, because although the Bitcoin transactions themselves are low friction, the moving into Bitcoin will always be high friction. Assume 5%. Always assume in the future moving dollars to Bitcoins cost you 5%. Since Square charges 2.75% for accepting credit card, why take Bitcoin? Yet because Bitcoin is volatile, the receiver must convert back to dollars quickly. Therefore, that dollar to Bitcoin friction is the friction of Bitcoin. So for the people who think Bitcoin's not a store of value but a useful method for wire transfers, 5%. I don't think Western Union charges much more than that. It's not a good system because this friction is insurmountable. And of course, it's fun for thieves. Pawn a system, grab the Bitcoin wallet, and run. Bitcoin exchanges are fun. Hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins. Poof. And let's face it, normal people can't secure their computers, so how can they use Bitcoin? Because it's irreversible. So what can you buy with Bitcoin? Well, first of all, there are the crypto-anarchist, gold bug, libertarian types. So like if you went to Porkfest 10 aka the Porcupine Festival, which is this gathering put on by the Free State Project that promises if 20,000 people will commit to move to New Hampshire to create a libertarian paradise, they'll do it. They haven't gotten 20,000 people yet. There you could actually buy a lot of stuff with Bitcoin. Somebody was nice and set up a Bitcoin ATM that allowed you to take cash to Bitcoin. And let's face it, also if you get donations from the crypto-anarchist gold bug libertarians, like if you're, say, the EFF, you want to take Bitcoin, but you just turn them Bitcoins to dollars and take it as dollars. So reality is the only thing that Bitcoin is good for is things that cannot be processed by credit cards, because that friction is so much higher than credit cards. And that basically means gambling to US and drugs. So a huge fraction of all Bitcoin transactions, you can watch it live, are what's known as Satoshi dice. And this is the dumbest gambling you have ever imagined. You just send a fraction of a Bitcoin to a given address. It does a hash of the transaction ID and a secret. And if the hash is less than the magic value, you get a payout. If not, you get a Satoshi as evidence that the transaction went through. And then the secret is revealed every 24 hours, allowing you to know that you were honestly stolen from. And there's Me Too sites, Satoshi Roulette. There's a poker site, Seals with Clubs. And this is all because Visa, etc., will not process gambling for U.S. residents. Which means if you want to target U.S. residents with your online gambling, be it something lame like Satoshi Dice or something a little bit more like Seals with Clubs, you have to do alternate payment. Web money, Bitcoin, used to be Liberty Reserve. Those are the only mechanisms possible, because these sites are blockaded otherwise from the US side of the financial system. And then there's Silk Road, which I'm assuming everybody's heard of. This is probably the most significant market in Bitcoin land. And it's a Tor hidden services marketplace. It's mostly US-centric, and it only accepts Bitcoin. And there's 3 innovations in Silk Road that make Silk Road work. First is it actually uses Tor hidden service, so tracking and takedown is, I don't want to try. You could probably hack the site, and a good exercise for anybody who's a lawyer is drafting something for the DOJ allowing them to break into it. It has a mandatory feedback and escrow system. It's basically eBay, and the eBay with a built-in escrow system. But the escrow system has this final thing of a currency hedge, because as a seller on Silk Road, on this marketplace, you have the problem of Bitcoin's volatility is awful. It's horrible. So you can set your price in Bitcoins tied to the dollar exchange rate. When the payout is returned to you on close of escrow, it's in constant dollars, not Bitcoins. And thus, there's no volatility risk for the seller. So Silk Road is significant. Silk Road's on the order of $2 million a month, which is, what, probably 2 drug corners in Baltimore, 3? It's still probably the biggest thing in Bitcoin land of economic significance, though. Another interesting side story is Silk Road's failure spin-off called the Armory. They were leery of guns. They have no problem with drugs, but guns were a problem. How un-American. So they spun off the guns, ammo, and weapons into a separate site called the Armory. Unfortunately, the Armory failed in very short order. Why? Well, they're a black market. And buying guns on the Armory is amazingly illegal for everybody and anybody, as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives, and you're not allowed to have any fun toys at all, thank you very much, is amazingly strict about mail order sales, which bypass federal law. You cannot ship guns through the mail for sale across state lines without getting those guys on you, and you don't want those guys on you. But because it's a black market, it means black market prices. So, unfortunately for them, 95% of U.S. citizens buying guns online is amazingly legal. You just go to a site with a name like Cheaper Than Dirt. Yes, this actually is an online gun shop. The ammo is shipped to your door in most cities and states. And the guns are shipped to your local down-the-street federal firearm licensed dealer. You can find one that's probably a few blocks from your house. It ships, you write them a check for all the paperwork, and you get the gun by local state laws. And so how can you build a black market when you're competing against a light market where you have sites like Cheaper Than Dirt? Of course, because I don't want some logo in my PDF, a good meme instead. Another thing is Bitcoin's anonymity is a delusion. It's pseudonymous. Every transaction's public. You can just download the transaction record of everything that has ever happened in Bitcoin. It's called turning on a Bitcoin client. And the open nature allows easy participation. And Sarah McEljohn has a paper coming out in CCS where she uses both of these. She's the lead author and just rips apart Bitcoin's anonymity. You cannot. Bitcoin is not so far from being anonymous that it's a joke. And well, since effectively all funds from Silk Road accounts are the proceeds of drug dealing, well, all those transactions have been recorded forever in the public. Congratulations, Mr. Drug Dealer. Brilliant. And so the only anonymity that actually occurs in Bitcoin of note is the exchanges, which turn the Bitcoins back into dollars. But the exchanges are now play nice or be thrown in jail because you've all heard about the Liberty Reserve takedown. This was an alternate currency used for money laundering and stuff like that. And they're all rotting in jail now. And may they rot for a good long time. Which means all the feds need to do, and this is what I encourage if you have any federal agent friends who are dragged up in front of Congress with some frothing senator griping about Silk Road, which might happen again, all they need to do is, we got this. You do a few Silk Road buys and sells to identify the wallets. Hey, it's an anonymous marketplace. Anybody can join. Anybody can be a seller. Anybody can be a buyer. Just participate. That allows you to identify all the money flow. You send nasty mail to the exchanges saying, on these flows, where did the dollars go when it got converted from Bitcoin? And if need be, you do a follow-up with a personal visit from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division to the exchanges. Quoting a defense attorney, the difference between the IRS CID and the Romulan battle fleet, a Romulan battle fleet has a better sense of due process. And now that you know all the money, you file civil forfeiture suits against the mal-identified U.S. bank accounts, and since it's all drugs, books about drugs, maybe a little porn, drugs, they have to prove that they were in the books about drugs or a little bit of porn. Other than that, well, the money's yours, and you put them out of business. So, and if they do try to fight it, now you've identified them and can do the rest of your investigation. Silk Road only exists as long as the Treasury doesn't want to take it down. Another fun in Bitcoin is Bitcoin Savings and Trust. This happened over the summer last year. A super duper secret high yielding investment in Bitcoin. 7% weekly return on investment using some Bitcoin based super duper top secret code word specific investment. Come on, guys. It's a Ponzi scheme. But, well, huge number of people actively bought into it, even while others were screaming online, this is a Ponzi scheme, you bloody idiots. And it even developed side bets. The director of Bitcoin Magazine bet publicly with a bunch of people, just publicly online on the forum, side bets, to the tune of 10,000 Bitcoins, $100,000 at current exchange, that, he did not have, by the way, it turns out, that this was not a Ponzi scheme. Who wants to bet it was a Ponzi scheme? Come on, guys. The most sensible explanation for what was going on is it was investing in other Ponzi schemes. But it was a big one. Notional value of 500,000 Bitcoins, perhaps. It's still unclear just how big, but even if it was 100,000, that would be still significant. Since this was Bitcoin at 10, this was a $1 to $5 million Ponzi scheme. But the bigger number is 5% of all Bitcoin. 5% of all Bitcoin got tied up in a single Ponzi scheme. And of course, the guy who was running Bitcoin Magazine couldn't pay his bets, is no longer head of Bitcoin Magazine. The Bitcoin community unmasked the guy behind it, a guy named Trendon Chafers of Texas. He's living free. Nothing's happened. Can't get law enforcement interested. Nobody lost enough individually to sue or try to actually make the case that Bitcoin's actually of any value at all. But this is not the best part. Guess what Trendon Chafers' account name was? The online persona everybody thought was running this super secret investment. Pirate at 40! People were investing in an obvious Ponzi scheme run by a guy named Pirate at 40. This is the Bitcoin community. And now let's talk about big money. Mt. Gox, biggest Bitcoin exchange on the planet. Half the Bitcoin to dollar conversions happen at Mt. Gox. Coinlab's a startup/incubator. They've got a few $100,000 worth of venture sucker capital. And last year, Mt. Gox saw the writing on the wall and wanted to ditch U.S. customers. And so they agreed with CoinLab to create a spin-off venture. And with the Bitcoin run-up, things fell through. And also, I think it fell through when it was clear that just avoiding U.S. customers will not avoid the reach of the U.S. Treasury anyway. So it fell through. So CoinLab sued for $75 million. $25 million more than the liquidated damages in the contract. The contract said if it falls through, the other party owes, the defaulting party owes $50 million. Well, they upped it by an extra $25 million for no reason other than, well, it's Bitcoin. But the interesting thing is, they had to put the contract in the federal lawsuit. Guess how big this joint venture was supposed to be in gross revenue? So gross revenue for the joint venture of all U.S. and Canadian customers for the biggest Bitcoin exchange on the planet. $300,000 a year, growing at 10% a year. $300,000 a year gross revenue barely hires an FTE engineer. In fact, Mt. Gox really is a one-man company. It shows they've gotten hacked before. And this is the economic thinking behind legitimate Bitcoin investments. And now the Winklevoss twins claim to own 1% of all Bitcoin. Just when the prices hit 200. Now it's back down to 100. Great timing, guys. So how did that sale of Facebook work out for you? And now they've filed paperwork with the SEC to do a Bitcoin investment fund. Of course, what does the Bitcoin investment fund consist of? Buying Bitcoins that do absolutely nothing ever. Which has this huge hacking target written on it. Remember what I said about irreversibility? You collect 50,000 Bitcoin, 100,000 Bitcoin, 5 million Bitcoin. Talk about saying, hack me, dude. I don't care how good your key escrow, key splitting, blah, blah, blah stuff is. This says, hack me. And of course, no liability from the Winklevoss themselves should anything go wrong. It specifically says that this is an independent entity, that it's only liable for itself. And they announced it just before Bitcoin prices slid back down to 80. Well, it's back up to 100, so I can't blame them too much. So the SEC is going to have a good chuckle as they stamp denied on this application. But prediction, when the SEC finally steps on it, the Bitcoin community, who even as crazy as they are, wouldn't be so stupid as to put their Bitcoins in with the Winklevoss, will scream about economic oppression and how the U.S. Treasury is out to destroy the great grand experiment of Bitcoin. It self-destructs. So what's next? You've got Me Too clones. Litecoin is probably the most successful. It's Bitcoin with an ASIC-resistant cost function. That's it. But it has this catchy slogan of Litecoin silver to Bitcoin's gold. So they've gotten about maybe 20% of the belief that Bitcoin has. So it's non-trivial. In fact, right now for botnets, you make more money with Litecoin than Bitcoin unless you have GPU miners. Ripple is an interesting idea. It unfortunately suffers from, if you actually want to make it work, it adds central authorities, and these guys, the people who are attracted to Bitcoin, don't like central authorities. FinCEN has said this stuff is money, therefore you have to treat it like money, which means Bitcoin exchanges and related services are money transfer operations, which means setting up a new exchange costs $100,000 and a lot of lawyer hassle because every state regulates their independent money transfer regulations plus the Fed. But it's also, more importantly, it's the nail in the coffin of Bitcoin's anonymity. Bitcoin is anonymous until the Fed knocks on the door of the exchange. Because if you don't cooperate with the feds on money laundering, you are going to jail. Sorry. So, the future. There's some really interesting ideas to steal technically. You can 5-cent, you do basically a 5-cent transfer, a 0.0005 Bitcoin transfer to a garbage wallet, and that gives you a nice cryptographic timestamp service. Really, really, really strong cryptographic timestamp service. It's quite nice. Bitcoin has no future, though. Never has, never will. But it's going to be fun while it lasts. Because it's a circulating currency that can't. It's a store of value that isn't. And it's a community of people who aren't piston heads, mind you, who think fiat is a 4-letter word. But it'll stick around for a while. Because in the end, it's the ultimate .com stock minus the sock puppet. Yes, that is mypets.com sock puppet. Yes, it's still in box. And yes, that is a Bitcoin that I have around its neck on its collar. And finally, while I'm really here, and since you guys are all forbidden from working this weekend anyway, go over to Laguna Seca. There should be some good racing. And the obligatory dissolve to make Edward Tufte scream and kill kittens. So, questions, comments? Bitcoin is this weird. This is the world of Bitcoin.
Are the hashes actually usable to break code?
No. There have been one Me Too Bitcoin that has gotten some cred where the hash function is instead looking for pairs of primes and stuff like that. Part of the problem is this notion of proof of work. It's kind of hard to do something meaningful with a proof of work function. So like you can't do SETI at home or stuff like that. Bitcoin per se, it's just SHA. It's just a brute force partial collision SHA of less than a given value. It's not actually useful for breaking anything. It's only really useful for protecting Bitcoin.
Is there a way to trick miners into finding hash collisions for you?
No, because actual collisions as opposed to partial collisions are nigh impossible. It's 256-bit SHA. You aren't going to get full collisions. They're only doing partial collisions. You could use the mining rigs themselves to try full collision brute force, but why bother? It's not going to work because the odds are too slim. That's why it's only partial collision.
So have the economists written papers about all of this? And
Don't laugh at it. It's a
One would think so.
there's no papers that I know of on the economics front, but there's been a fair number of economic reporters. Felix Salmon has done a really good overview where he's collected everybody's view on Bitcoin and for himself as well. And I don't think the economists have published anything yet just due to publication latency.
They did have an article though in The Economist on Bitcoin.
Yeah, there's popular press articles.
The Economist is different from Economist.
Well, he said did you just say the economists from The Economist?
No, I was meaning the economists as the research community, not the magazine.
Misunderstood.
But they'll have fun with this. It's really nice because all the data's public.
More so than expected.
No, it's the problem is Bitcoin architecturally never claimed to be anonymous. It always claimed to be pseudonymous. And so as a result, people have thought about mixes, but mixes don't work very good unless you have lots of stuff mixing, and you can still go mixes, even mixes where you have multiple pools. So you guarantee that the coin that comes out of the mix is not the coin that comes in. I can still, it's a public service, participate in the mix, find out all your pools, and I see you get 10 Bitcoins in, 10 Bitcoins out. Well, 9.7 Bitcoins out. That's a pretty good signal there. There has been it's great for cryptographers to do publications. There was one at Oakland Security and Privacy on using zero knowledge to actually get a true anonymous coin that you could put into Bitcoin, where you could do a zero knowledge proof so you could convert a Bitcoin into a zero coin and then do a zero knowledge proof to turn a zero coin back into a Bitcoin. The problem is the math involved is who knows what, makes Bitcoin conceptually, I can maybe explain to my dad, the zero knowledge stuff, you can't get the mind share to get people to understand. And to be honest, you still have the flow rate. 5 people turn into 0 coins, 5 0 coins are spent over there. That's only 1 in 5 right there. Not very good. But it's great for talking about crypto systems that will never get built. But hey, isn't that what the non-systems cryptographers do? The systems cryptographers are basically software security people these days.
All right, so we're like 5 minutes over, so let's thank the speaker and talk to Nick offline.